This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Hello and welcome to this week's episode, where my guest is Vicky Chown. Vicky is a medical herbalist, foraging instructor and self-taught permaculturist. She's head gardener at Omved Gardens, a fascinating community garden in London, which focuses on food, creativity and wellbeing.
I grew up in the city in a very concrete kind of environment in London, and I didn't have access to so much outdoor space. But as a child, I always really loved nature. So I slowly started getting into plants. I used to go to car boot sales with my mum and buy like a little fluffy plant and keep that. And I think from there, I gravitated towards herbs and plants for healing. I had really bad acne as a teenager, and I looked for natural remedies to try and treat it. And I started working in Neil Dried Remedies, which is a herb shop. And from there, I did a degree in herbal medicine. So it's always been planty. There's always been planty stuff going on. But I got an allotment very young, I think when I was about 19, because I love plants. And then I started working at a community garden in Highgate. And then from there, I started working at Omved Gardens and became the head grower and kitchen gardener.
And what is Omved Gardens and where is it?
So primarily we're an event space, an environmental space in North London, Highgate. And we run lots of events for the community, for public, mostly around food, good eating. We teamed up with an organisation called the Chef's Manifesto, who are working from the chef level down to try and encourage better food, seasonal food, better farming practices. But from my point of view, I just love to teach people how to grow food, prepare food, eat food, forage for food. And we have quite a lot of wild areas that we have wild natives and things that you can forage for. And we also have a fermentation kitchen. So we have a kitchen in a big greenhouse there, which is our main event space at the moment, that we ferment loads of foods and preserve them for the year-long use.
I cannot get my head around fermentation. I tried to make sauerkraut and it was a bit of an unmitigated disaster. So anything to do with fermentation for me is like alchemy. So I'm so keen to learn more. So who kind of founded Omved Gardens and what's the ethos behind it?
Yeah, it's a privately owned garden space. We're very lucky. It was saved from becoming basically blocks of flats and turned into an environmental space. Yeah, it's privately funded and it's a not-for-profit. So we have two really large for London, ponds down at the bottom, which are a really wild space. Loads of wild spaces around the outside with kind of mini woodlands and loads of trees. And then we have our kitchen garden and an event space. So it's a big old space with lots going on.
How big is it?
I've been told it's like 3.5 acres, but I look at it and I think it can't be, but it is on a slope, so it's quite hard to tell.
Yeah, that's a big space for London, isn't it?
It's called Highgate Bowl, and it used to be an old garden centre, and currently we're having quite a lot of work done. So at the moment, only 2/3 of it is open. The other third is becoming event spaces. We've got a beautiful big greenhouse going in to grow more vegetables and a seed library to keep for that's something I haven't mentioned. We have a seed saving network.
Amazing. I mean, what always strikes me about growing food and growing for nature is that actually sometimes it's hard to reconcile the two. And especially if you're somewhere where space is precious, you might think actually we could do with those areas being in commission and being cultivated. So it might be a luxury to have an area that's wilder. What's the theory behind having those wilder areas?
Well, I think it's just about our ethics and morals, basically. Between Hampstead Heath, Highgate Woods, Waterloo Park, and you've got Ali Pali a little bit down the way. Oh, and Parkland Walk, which is a kind of nature reserve on an old railway in North London. And we just decided to be a green bridge and have these water spots, these big ponds for birds to stop off and drink, for all animals to stop off and drink. So that is really the core of it. You know, garden centres, while they seem like green spaces, are not particularly green often and use a lot of chemicals. So it was a big renovation, moving from being an old garden centre to being kind of nature spot. But our lovely landscape architect, Paul, he loves his wild spots, but there's still lots of structure there. We have beech hedges that are really well maintained, but we have these really wild areas. And for me, I'm always kind of trying to fight and push for a little bit more growing space in the veg world, because I'm all about the vegetables. But there's a really good balance there, for sure.
I was thinking as you were talking, do the garden users interact with the wilder spaces? But actually, I think probably the first question to ask is, who are the garden users?
So the garden users are quite varied. from everyday members of the public. Also, we do private events for all kinds of things. We've had weddings, we've had funerals, but we also have a volunteer group weekly every Wednesday. So anyone can join that, open to all abilities. And we have school groups. So we have groups of local schools come down regularly throughout the seasons to learn about the cycles of growing, essentially.
And could a member of the public visit, or are there specific open days for the public?
So we're not open like as a 7-day-a-week thing, but we are open on lots of event days, particularly in the spring and summer. We're very lucky to be able to work very seasonally and kind of honour seasonability as like humans. So we shut down quite a lot over winter and I actually work from home a lot and do a lot of admin. So spring and summer, yes, visitors can come to any one of our events. We also have open days. We often do them throughout late spring, early summer, and we open pretty much every Saturday. And then just so many events, so many family events. Lots of them are free, lots of them are open to the public. Some of them are kind of supper clubs and things they're charged for, but all manner of things going on Omved. It's really hard to keep track, actually.
Yeah, looking at your website, you do look like you do an awful lot. So going back to the food aspect of it, and obviously that is very important at the site, what else do you do around food? How do you factor that into everyday experience in the garden?
It's a really unusual working environment in that we have such a connection between kitchen and garden there. So I'm very lucky that our head chef, Jo, she actually volunteered with us in the garden. She wasn't a trained chef at all. She volunteered with us in lockdown. And she just displayed that she really loved fermentation. And I had a bit of experience. So we began like experimenting together and then she became head chef. So she knows the garden really, really well. And I know the kitchen really, really well. So we have this really wonderful overlap where seasonality comes into play a lot. And, you know, it's a no-waste kitchen. So she's so great at recycling and using everything we give her. So that overlap is really nice. And then the Chef's Manifesto, we have these, I think it's 2 or 3 times a year, we have the Chef's Manifesto come in and chefs from all over the world come and talk about food, what they're doing, unusual things like we have the Beans is How project, which is trying to encourage people to eat more beans. Leguminous crops, obviously, we know are great for the soil, and rare grains like millets and things, which are eaten in many other countries, but not so much here. So just loads of really interesting people and passing through constantly. It's a really wonderful movement at Omved with loads of information and loads of new things coming in all the time.
It's such a rabbit hole, I think, when you start moving your crops into the kitchen and then playing with ways of how you can actually make things with what's on site rather than bringing stuff in. I think you just go down this rabbit hole and you think, actually, I'm making bread with flour, but can I make flour? I mean, how much do you experiment? How much do you push the boundaries in terms of what you grow and what you use in the kitchen?
That is a very good example because we've just sown 2 types of heritage wheat this year. And we have a tiny grow. Like our kitchen garden, we actually produce some years over 300 kilograms of food. We measure and weigh everything. So we produce a hell of a lot because our beds are never empty. We practice permaculture and we never leave a bed empty. But yes, so we are actually going to try to make our own flour, which is interesting. So we don't draw the line. What we do have to do is be selective in what we try in certain seasons. So we did a legume trial where we just grew a metre squared of different legumes and studied them. We like to collect a little bit of data. So with our seed saving network, we ask that our contributors collect a little bit of data about their seed and their experience of growing in hopes to select varieties that are hardy and tolerant to a changing climate and to our local environment. I'm not sure how much we limit what we do, basically. The only limit we have is space, not enthusiasm, that's for sure.
No. Or daring as well, by the sounds of it. One of the things that, again, particularly in an urban space, if you are constantly taking from the garden, so, you know, you're harvesting, you're feeding people who are then going away, you're collecting seeds, you're constantly harvesting. In a rural garden, I think it's easier to get the organic matter back in. In an urban space, I always think, you know, well, you could actually get people to drop off their green waste or their composting stuff, but then you've got the problem of contamination and whether what they're using is organic. So I find it hard to get my head around how you replenish that site. What do you do in terms of feeding your soil and sort of putting back in?
Yes, so soil is the foundation, as any garden knows, but particularly in a more permaculture setting. And we did have that problem. It is difficult in the city to get in enough matter, you know, even just trying to buy some hay bales If you're in the countryside, you can pick them up for £6, but to get them delivered to a city garden, it's like, I don't know how much. It increases, and then you've got transport, you've got petrol, you've got all these things that you don't want to use. So we actually have formed some really lovely relationships with various local companies. So there's one called Merit Mushrooms, who is a very local, they're in North London, mushroom company who grows speciality mushrooms, and they drop us off all of their spent mushroom blocks. So we get all of the nutrients from those, and we're introducing fungal spores and mycelium. And then we also, a lot of our staff and volunteers do bring in their compostable waste. I live on a boat, so I can't compost here. So I carry all of my kitchen waste to the garden every week. We just do the best we can. We grow loads of comfrey, loads of nettles, and compost all of our, everything that can be composted, even cardboard, which is a bit controversial right now. Even cardboard that we get deliveries in, it's all composted in our lovely big compost piles.
I do think it is a bit of a challenge. Talking of mushrooms, I saw your foraging for turkey tails video on the website. Do you manage to get many mushrooms going there?
We've had actually quite a difficulty. My old garden was a woodland garden, so we're right in the centre of wood in North London. But this garden is quite exposed. It's on a hill. I mean, Omved Gardens has only really been a kitchen garden space since 2019, September, so at the end of the season. And we've had like 3 ridiculously hot summers in that time. So we were inoculating a lot of logs and wine mushrooms on wood chips. But yeah, we've had trouble keeping them moist enough to stay alive and colonise the logs. Turkey tail was the one that seemed to do the best because it's so wild and abundant. But we will definitely try again in other areas of the garden that are a bit more shady, a bit more protected.
And another thing that it mentions on your website is the sort of creative side. And again, I think that's just another layer of getting people to buy into the garden and be interested in it and interact with it. So what do you actually do on that front?
Yeah, the team is really interested in art. We have exhibitions. They started from the very beginning. In fact, exhibitions came before the kitchen garden did at Omved. So lots of local artists come together for Throne Gallery. And funny enough, when we first started digging up the site, we found lots of clay, being in London, lots of London clay. And the first exhibition we had was with local Throne artists, so Throne is in pottery, and they used the clay that we found. And we also found thousands of spoons, really randomly. There's lots of Victorian trash sites in Highgate. We found thousands of just spoons, no other cutlery, just spoons. And they used them as handles on jugs and all kinds of things. So yeah, we had a very cool exhibition that developed naturally from finding this. And it's kind of continued from there. A lot of people that gravitate towards the space are artists. We're working with a lovely artist at the moment called Vivian, who is going to attempt to portray our legume growing trials this year. And just all kinds of lovely relationships come out of art and nature. And so we like to try to facilitate them as best we can. And it's a lovely space with a really great light, which does help a lot.
It just brings more people in as well, and they kind of bring their own ideas and thoughts to the garden. And it's just another way of making the garden work for you, and people appreciate the space and what's growing in it. So yeah, I love that idea. And you mentioned your landscape architect, and I was really interested in actually the design of the site, because as you said, it is very structured. And I wondered how the design kind of feeds into the purpose of the site and also the overall experience for visitors.
So his name's Paul Gazowitz, and he's great. He's really hands-on. He works really closely. We always have meetings. And basically the site has been designed so that if you go on the website, there's an aerial view and you can really see these winding paths. Because we're on a slope, first of all, it needed to be accessible. We want everybody to be able to access this space. So it's completely wheelchair accessible. And it's also designed in a way that it makes you meander and slow down. So they're kind of in the middle of the bustling city. We've got Archway, 10-minute walk down the road. And then you have to just slow down. And you walk through these beautiful winding paths that are full of lavender and sage and rosemary and really aromatic plants, as well as all of our wildflower areas, which are full of wild herbs and plants, so that when we do herb walks and foraging walks, we can show those. And it just makes you take a minute. So I think that's been a really great way to make people slow down when they come into the garden, is to physically make them. It's not great for gardeners because we're running up and down with a wheelbarrow a million times a day. So that's, we're fit as fiddles. Me and my landscape gardener, John, are fit as fiddles. But in terms of making people slow down and really take stock of the garden, I think it's been wonderfully designed. And then, we've got these quite well manicured lawns, actually, which is surprising because it is quite wild. And then these hedges that are really well kept. And those create borders for the kind of wild sprawling areas, which we really do leave to go wild.
Do you find there's one area of the garden that people will particularly gravitate to, or is it horses for courses?
Yeah, I think it depends on the person. When you're up on the first deck that you come to, you've got all the wildflowers. Because we're so high, you can really overlook this beautiful view. You can really see a lot of the city, which is quite interesting because you're in this kind of little zen space, then you're looking out onto this hustle and bustle. And as you go through, we've got this beautiful eye-shaped kitchen garden that's surrounded by espalier and bleached apple trees. And a lot of people who are interested in fruits and vegetables, we grow such unusual varieties. I'm always on the search for the most rare and unusual things. So people often in the summer and spring buy things in there. But then, you've got people who just love the ponds down at the bottom, which are really peaceful. They trickle down, so you get this lovely noise of running water, and there's benches there. And you can be sitting in the middle of summer, you can be sitting in the wildflower patch there and no one can see you because it's so, so tall. So I think everyone does love their own little secret space there, which is what makes it special.
Yeah, and I think that's a testament to the design as well, isn't it? That in a garden that's got many visitors and is somewhere so busy that you can actually escape from the world and just sit down and have a bit of space. So it looks amazing and it sounds like a fantastic place. Just purely nosy for myself, what are you, apart from the wheat, what are you particularly excited about growing this year? Are you trying anything new out?
Actually, we're trying out hopness, which I heard on your podcast before. I can't remember who you were interviewing, but I actually bought the book that they were talking about and bought hopness, which is a leguminous plant that you harvest the root from. So that's going to be a first for us this year. So we're focusing on legumes in general because we have this beautiful partnership with Vivian, the artist. And yeah, we're going to be growing as many legumes as we can. We're also going to be testing the soil before and after. We have a soil scientist called Perry who's going to be looking at microbes and things and see what growing legumes in the soil does for our soil. And then I'm just an absolute sucker for tomatoes. I think last year we grew 18 types of tomato and we don't have a huge space. They're all in pots. But they're great because I love saving unusual tomatoes because we have this seed saving network and they're so easy to save seed from and they don't cross pollinate and you can grow as many as you want. So tomatoes are the one, I think.
I have to say I'm a big fan of the tomato and you can preserve it in loads of different ways as well. So it's a really good one. So if people, as you said, about your open days and things, if people wanted to find out more, if they're in the area and they wanted to join in, where can they go to find out more about the garden?
You can sign up to the newsletter on the website and that's pretty active. And from there, it will direct you to various places for like volunteering and give you a monthly update of what we're doing. And we're just starting to open up now for spring. So it feels like, we're on our way to events and it moves quickly when it does.
Yeah, I bet it does. And what about you've got a journal as well, haven't you?
Yes, so we have Where the Leaves Fall, which is an absolutely amazing magazine journal that covers so many broad topics and is worldwide. I'm biased, but I absolutely love it and I read it all the time and I give it to people all the time. I'd highly recommend having a read. There's snippets on the Where the Leaves Fall website and you can also buy paper copies or you can buy online as a digital copy.
Thank you very much to Vicky for taking part in the interview. And thank you to Abby Joy for recommending Vicky as a guest. And as always, thank you to you for listening. You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast,